Good afternoon and welcome to the PSTE Subcommittee. We have many budgets today to consider. We're going to have a slight change to the agenda. We're going to start with MDOT WMATA, then do MDOT Secretary's Office, MDOT Debt Service, MDOT Aviation, DPSCS Community Supervision, and DPSCS Training Commissions. I do have to step out for a very brief budget bill hearing in JPR. In that case, Senator Rosepep, I'm going to have you come over here when that happens. Okay. In the meantime, we have our friend Steve McCulloch. Steve.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Steve McCulloch with Department of Legislative Services here today to talk about the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority budget. I would just preface this. This has been in, the media a lot with the shortfall in 2025. This has a lot of discussion on that, but it is a kind of a fluid process. And I've, since the analysis was printed, there's been some movement on, resolving some of those problems. So I'm going to be going briefly over some of it that I know has changed and that the department and WMATA will talk about itself. But looking on page 1, the fiscal 2025 operating grant to WMATA, this is the state Maryland's portion only, not WMATA's full operating, increases by $14.2 million or 3%. There's a 3% cap in statute, and that complies with that. On page 2 shows the capital budget for fiscal 2025. Again, just the Maryland grant, which increases by $3 million or just under 1%. Looking to page 5, we'll start kind of exhibit 1 looks at and shows the federal stimulus that has been received by WMATA and used to help support the operating budget between fiscal 2020, and they actually do have a little bit left for 2025. But the reason this is kind of important is because much of the fiscal stress that has been covered, the operating cliff is, largely related to the fact that between fiscal 2020 and 2024, WMATA received $2.8 billion in federal assistance, operating assistance. As that goes away, that needs to be backfilled. And that has been one of the major factors that contribute to that fiscal stress. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the ridership, and this is kind of the second major piece of the puzzle causing the fiscal stress. And you can see from this graph, which shows 2028 through 2023, that ridership really plummeted during the pandemic. It has started improving, and in fact, in 2023, ridership increased by 35% over the prior year. However, despite that large, percentage increase, 2023 compared to 2019 is still down about 36%, which represents $109 million, 109 million trips. And so obviously, we'll see in a minute, fare box recovery got lower ridership, you're going to have lower recovery. Exhibit 3, we're now into the performance, the managing for results. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows a few metrics for both Metro Rail and Metro Bus. These are the revenue miles, passengers per revenue mile, and then operating expenses per revenue mile and operating expenses per passenger trip. In general, in those first 2 categories, increases are better, meaning having more passengers per revenue mile is better than having fewer. And on operating costs, obviously, the lower the operating cost per revenue mile and per passenger trip is good. So in 2023, the results were a bit mixed, but mostly positive. Revenue miles, passengers per revenue mile, and the operating costs per passenger trip all trended in, the favorable direction, the first 2 being up and the third one being down. However, operating costs per revenue mile for both the rail and the bus system did increase slightly over the prior year. Turning to page 8, exhibit 4 shows the fare box recovery I mentioned just a moment ago. And it shows 2019 through 2023. And similar to the ridership, because they are, very closely linked, during the pandemic, the fare box recovery plummeted as ridership plummeted. And it has been increasing, but again, comparing to 2019, the 2023 fare box recovery is, just over, over a third of the amount recovered in 2019. So that's important to keep in mind. We'll now start looking at the WMATA fiscal 2025 budget, and this talks about their entire operating budget, not just the Maryland piece. And Exhibit 5 shows both the operating and capital budgets as the proposed budget that was introduced, a total $4.4 billion, and each of the shares there you see for Maryland, 27% of the operating costs of the proposed budget and 13.2% of the capital budget. On the bottom of page 9 shows some of the major assumptions, and here lies the things that are kind of in flux and are changing. But the proposed budget, because it was capped in Maryland and Virginia, the operating subsidy is capped at 3% per year. That required, in order to produce a balanced budget, it required WMATA to do a number of things, and that included some pretty severe reductions in service for both Metrobus, with 67 of 135 lines, the elimination of 67 and reduced service on the remainder, the closure of 10 metro stations, which would be the lowest number of passengers passing through those, is how that would have been decided, but had not yet been set in stone. And also major reduction in rail service frequency, including 10 p.m. Closures and turnbacks on the red line and the silver lines. And then in addition to these kind of service reductions, the budget as proposed entails a 20% increase in general increase in fares and parking. So anytime fares are increased, that does have a negative impact on ridership. So this was not a budget that the WMATA wanted to submit, but again, the requirement to submit a balanced budget, would lead to these things. And as we get to issue 1 in a little bit, there's some light at the end of that tunnel. Exhibit 6 on page 10 shows the operating expenses by category. You can just see that personnel is the largest expense, and of the reduction of $534 million between the current year and the proposed budget necessitated by the balancing budget requirement, the personnel takes the biggest hit, and that would have involved layoffs of personnel as service changes were made. Exhibit 7 on page 11 shows the kind of proposed revenue. So WMATA raises its own revenues mostly through fares, but also has parking, advertising, some other miscellaneous type of revenues, and whatever they cannot raise by themselves gets generally in prior pandemic years was paid for from the subsidy from the 3 jurisdictions, Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. During pandemic, and including a small bit in 2025, there's been this federal aid that's been available to assist. In the proposed budget, that operating revenue plus the federal aid equated to just 27.8% of the total operating budget, which left the remaining 72% to be covered by the participating jurisdiction. At the bottom of page 11, we begin the discussion of the capital program. Unlike on the operating side, which has a formula that once the service levels are and the operating budget is set, the jurisdictions cover the portion not covered by WMATA's own revenues. On the capital side, the parameters are generally governed by a usually 6-year capital funding agreement that all of the parties set up. So the current capital agreement extends through June 30th of 2027. As you probably all recall, back in 2018, the General Assembly did pass legislation establishing a dedicated grant for Maryland to WMATA for its capital program of $167 million. This was a part of a $500 million dedicated grant to help WMATA address state of good repair needs. In addition to that, that legislation also established a process whereby the base capital grants that Maryland provides would be mandated. That has occurred, and Exhibit 12 shows the components in the Maryland CTP of the capital grant going to WMATA. The first 3 lines are the base capital, and at the bottom of that chart, you can see that it does increase by 3% per year, assuming that it will continue to be a mandated appropriation. The total 6-year program in Maryland CTP totals $3.2 billion. And it's important to note that the state funding is not just coming from the trust fund. Over the 6-year period, the trust fund comprises 53.7% of the funds. However, general funds account for an additional 37%, and general obligation bonds, which will cover the $167 million in the 2025 budget and is planned for 2026, account for the remaining 15.4% of that capital funding. On page 14, Exhibit 10 shows the categories of spending in the WMATA fiscal 2025 capital budget, $2.76 million. And Exhibit 11 shows the sources of that funding, the federal, the state and local, and other sources. And then the second column on Exhibit 11 on page 15 shows the Maryland share, which equates to $351 million of that fiscal 2025 budget. The next page, we do Exhibit 12 shows a comparison. There's always a kind of a disconnect between the schedules between Maryland's putting its budget in for session and WMATA's budget, which does not get finalized until generally April. So this shows the variance. There's always a little bit of difference between what Maryland assumes in its allowance and what the proposed budget for WMATA has in its budget. And in this year, it's just a small variance of $3 million on the capital side, but that gets kind of trued up in April once the WMATA board approves its budget. The first issue is on page 17, and this discusses the fact that Maryland's dedicated purpose account includes $150 million, which is an addition to the funds already discussed for budgeted in the capital grant to be used to support operations for WMATA. This $150 million, when combined with increased shares from Virginia and the District of Columbia, are getting pretty close to at least mitigating much of those service cuts that I talked about and some of the fare increases. You can see on Exhibit 13 on page 17, this is from a report to the Finance Committee that WMATA CEO presented. WMATA had already taken actions to do cost containment for fiscal 2025. There were $183 million that were covered by that federal carryover that I mentioned a moment ago. Some task force was created to identify ongoing savings of $50 million. And then there was a proposed salary freeze, which in total eliminated $163 million of the $750 million fiscal 2025 cliff. The second box level down was actually net bad news. Based on 2024 revenue attainment levels, WMATA wrote down the amount of revenue expected to bring in 2025 by $67 million. That was offset slightly by change in assumptions on inflation, as inflation had been moderating. But overall, that increased the problem by $59 million. And then finally, the WMATA proposed budget shifts $193 million from the capital budget to the operating. This is for maintenance activities. It is permissible under the federal law. This goes to the maximum permissible. However, it does have an impact on the capital side that those dollars cannot be used to maintain and do state of good repair on the capital side. That left $433 million to be solved that would have been solved in the proposed budget by the service cuts and the fare increases I've outlined. And therefore, again, this $150 million that Maryland the governor put in the dedicated purpose account, combined with the federal, or the DC and the Virginia amounts, could negate most of those service cuts. And I'm sure WMATA is now prepared to talk about the status of kind of that agreement, because it will take an agreement between the three funding partners, to provide this additional funding. The second issue on page 18 is a joint chairman's report that the budget committees asked for WMATA to submit on the investment on transit-oriented development, or TOD, within the Beltway in Maryland. WMATA submitted the report outlining its efforts, and Exhibit 14 on page 19 shows the joint development activity going on inside of Maryland at WMATA's various facilities that are listed there. We've asked WMATA to comment on whether cost containment reductions, particularly if there were closures of stations, would impact its TOD activities in Maryland. The recommended actions are on page 20 for both the operating and the capital grant. That recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, any questions? Analyst? Okay, thank you very much. Please join us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of Transportation, and I'm joined today with Randy Clark, General Manager of WMATA, often referred to as Metro. Thank you, Stephen, again for the great analysis. Just a few opening remarks before turning it over to the General Manager. While Metro serves the entire National Capital Region, it is also an integral part of MDOT's overall transportation system serving the citizens of Maryland. And we work very closely with our National Capital Region partners in the district and Virginia to promote regional collaboration and address challenging issues facing the system. The fiscal year 25 budget has been one of those challenges, as has been outlined by Stephen. Thanks to Governor Moore's leadership, we were able to advance $150 million in the fiscal year 25 budget to partially address the fiscal issues facing Metro. This commitment has resulted in both the district and Virginia contributing resources, and now the budget situation is moving forward towards a final solution of resolution this spring. But I think it is also important to remind everyone that while we are making progress in fiscal year 25, we will need to confront the future challenges related to funding for Metro as we address the much larger financial challenges facing the Transportation Trust Fund. So now we'll turn it over to Randy to talk to the specifics of this report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Chairman, and members of the committee. Thanks for having me here again today. I also want to, recognize, as the Secretary says, thank you to the Governor, and I give a lot of thanks to the Secretary sitting next to me as well, putting together the budget that reflected that $150 million commitment above the FY25 plus 3%. That's critically important, and it helped really move, I think, our regional conversation forward. So deeply appreciate it. Also thank a lot of the members of the legislature that we've been talking to about this obviously critical topic. So it's been a year since I've been here last. I'll give you a quick update on some stuff that's going on in Metro that we think are pertinent. Obviously, it's a regional system, but it does impact the entire state of Maryland. And if we're running well, that really goes a long way to help move the DMV economy and people around Maryland. So in the last year, ridership has grown as we got great analysis done there. So about 30% recovery in ridership last year. I'm also really proud of the effort of the team. We have the highest customer satisfaction rating in the history of Metro right now. So the people that are using the system feel very satisfied with the quality. Does that mean we have perfect days? No. From time to time, we're not going to have a perfect day, but overall, the reliability and frequency is working pretty well. Want to recognize that we're working with our regional partners on solving the fiscal crisis for the FY25 budget. But as the Secretary mentioned, even if we get some resolution here on FY25, it seems the never-ending cycle of Metro budgets will be right in front of us again as we deal with FY26 and going forward. And I think we've been pretty clear with everyone, until we actually come towards a regional consensus on a dedicated revenue stream for our transit system, and Metro being the major anchor of our transit network, we're going to continue to have this kind of ongoing conversation. So I know everyone dislikes having this ongoing conversation. I can promise you at Metro, the feeling is the same. And I think there's a lot of people in the region that really want to try to move this forward. Before I get into the budget questions, I wanted to highlight a few more things. As I mentioned, the customer satisfaction is very high, 88% on rail, currently 77% on bus, and Metro Access is 77% as well. The number one complaint we generally get, right, and has been since the day I become the general manager, is really right fare evasion. But I can promise you it's a very, very high priority for us, and we are making pretty substantial gains in that area. Lots of people obviously never fast enough, but we are working hard on it. We're modernizing all of our fare gates. We got about a third of the system done. We'll have them all done by sometime by late summer. So far, we're averaging about a 70% reduction in fare evasion wherever we put new gates. We're also replacing all of our fare readers on all of our buses, and those are working actually pretty well. I did a lot of inspections personally last evening on that, and we're starting to see more revenue from our ridership because of that. So that's probably going to take a year or two of nonstop work to get back to kind of a more normal, if you will, way that fares work. But it's a national issue around fare evasion that we're working with. As the analyst mentioned, our proposed operating budget is about 2.4 billion. We have to do a balanced budget, as was also mentioned. I know it's a little repetitive as we talked about, but it really is important that we have a balanced budget as part of our compact. So since we put out the original GM proposed budget, we were able to come up with a, if you will, a revised proposed budget just last week. And that includes up to $480 million of jurisdictional revenues to help support Metro for FY25, 150 being the Maryland contribution. On top of that, we were able to figure out how to bring about $50 million in internal administrative efficiencies, and those are reoccurring costs. I will say that is very, very difficult to do. The secretary sitting beside me did a great job for years trying to continue to bring more efficiencies into the system. There is not much left to really touch in this topic area. I can promise you that. But staff has believed that we can execute to this 50 million. This will be a challenge to do, but we're going to work really hard at doing it. We also want to not do much preventive maintenance transfer, obviously, because the capital program is so important and it keeps us in a state of good repair. But obviously that during crisis, that has to be flexed sometimes. So that is on the table. We also are going to do 0 merit increases for all of our represented staff, and we put down in the budget no increases for all of our 689 and 922 labor unions as well. Now we'll be starting CBA negotiations with them, so I'm sure that will be a topic. But in the budget, it does list that. I'll be eyes wide open. That's going to be a challenge for us on retainment and recruitment of staff. Obviously, it's a very low employment rate in the DMV, and we need to be competitive. And not having raises is very hard, especially for people that I think are working very, very hard to do. But it's something we feel obligated to do. We'll also be doing some targeted service cuts. The region was dedicated to running 8-car train sets. That was a big policy goal for about the last 15 years here at Metro. But we're going to run more 6-car train sets to try to reduce a little bit of maintenance on the rail car fleet. That is purely a short-term fix. It's clearly not going to work long-term as crowding grows. That's going to become a big problem, but we think we can get by in FY25 with some more 6-car train sets. We are also looking at a shorter peak. So instead of a 4-hour traditional peak service, we're looking at just around a little bit more than 2 hours. That's also going to eventually cause some problems because our peaks are starting to come back. And I'll give you an example. Last Tuesday, we had our highest 8 to 9 a.m. rush hour in 3.5 years, obviously since the pandemic. And we also had our highest amount of federal workers on the system last Tuesday as well. So our core constituency, our, if you will, normal base commuter is returning, which is fantastic news because as we get into tourist season, that just builds onto the base that we have. So these are short-term kind of methodologies to try to be as efficient as possible in the short term. The proposed budget has a 12.5% fare increase. A little nuance there is currently we have a flat fare evenings and weekends, and what we're proposing to do is get rid of the flat and any trip that is above 225, because that would be the new base, can float up to 250. So effective fare increase would be 14% overall. And we do believe that will generate some more revenue. It's about $24 million, I believe, back into the system. Obviously, we are being very, trying to be very competitive with people driving. Parking is much cheaper than it was pre-pandemic at a lot of our major activity centers. And if people only work a few days in the office, we got to be really mindful of that. And fares do impact elasticity a little bit of using the system. We also have $95 million from kind of pretty effective budget management last year left over, and we will be deploying that to FY26. I want to reiterate that will not be available again in FY26. So when we're here next year, we will be $100 million short. If everything else stays the same, we're $100 million short, and therefore all three jurisdictions, we either fill that gap or we will have to have service cuts. There won't be any other budget maneuvering that we will be able to do. Public engagement process on the budget just started this in the last week. And I'll be back here on Monday with the secretary on the House side as well. And we're doing DC oversight hearing tomorrow. And we're obviously doing a lot of meetings in Richmond. So just this budget process, we feel a lot more optimistic, obviously, with a lot of the information that's out there across the three jurisdictions. But I think you all know until something's signed by law, we certainly don't have finality on that. Give you a quick update on our 8,000 series rail cars with Hitachi. They're being built here in Maryland. We are moving forward on that procurement. We're actually going to an open gangway style train, which is kind of what you'd see a lot more in Europe and Asia. We're really excited about that. That will replace our oldest series trains, the 2000s, and eventually some and 3000 series trains. So again, our fleet will become more reliable, more modern, more energy efficient. So really good across the board. Our mock-up vehicle is actually en route right now from a boat in Italy, somewhere in the Atlantic. It's going to be in the port of Baltimore early next month, and we'll be looking forward to providing opportunities for the public to come see that mock-up for some events soon to be announced, but that'll be towards late March. So very exciting, and it's a great project, for jobs in Maryland as part of the metro system. So with that, welcome any questions, but I do thank you all for having the opportunity to have me here today. And, really again, appreciate the Secretary and MDOT's partnership and leadership moving us all forward.
Thank you very much. Senator Sowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the information. We've known for the past couple of years about the new trains. They were an issue because of our old trains, and I know they're still in place, and I know we're going back to 6 cars, and I know, but our service is going up, and so I don't want to discourage, our constituents or our people, and I know, but I'm just wondering, are we continuing on with our PMs and making sure that we're updated in that? And you said the new trains. But when are we going to be in place so we can, move forward with that? Because I know it's been an issue for a period of time.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of layers under to the fleet question. So we are doing all of our preventive maintenance. What's going to be really good is probably late spring, we're going to start retiring our 2000 series trains. So 2000 series trains kind of came out of storage in one way. They were just kind of being set aside for the 7000 series. Obviously, the 7000 series train, we had a wheel migration issue. NTSB came out a report last month on that. We believe we have the engineering solution. NTSB report mentions that with a lot of very specialized consultants figured out the exact piece on that. Basically, we have to press the wheel and do the axle a little tighter into basically equivalent of the hub for quickest layman terms description of that. We're already doing that pressing. We have about 45 rail cars done. We're doing about 4 to 6 a week. That's going to take a little bit more than a year because we want to integrate it as cost effective as we can into our overhaul maintenance program. But as those units come back, those rail cars come back into the fleet, we're going to be retiring our old, 45-year-old 2000 series rail cars. So the entire fleet becomes more reliable and actually more cost effective. As we move to the 8Ks, that's going to allow us to retire the next oldest fleet, which is the 3000 series rail car. And then on the 6, and we want to eventually obviously run 8-car rail sets, right? I mean, we spent hundreds of $millions to upgrade the power systems across the region. All of our shops, yards are kind of set for that 8-car consist style. But in the shorter term, we're trying to balance how do we use every single rail car as cost effective as possible. Because as you know, ridership's not monolithic. So we're going to have peaks on hours or parts of the system and other parts of the system during other hours. We, on Sunday night at 10:30, we don't have a lot of people, but on 8 a.m. on Wednesday, right now we are actually sometimes at almost crushed load. So we're trying to manage and keep obviously it's safe and comfortable as people, but also trying to understand that if we can save a few $1 million here and there to run a little shorter sets, at least for a year or two, we're going to try to do that.
And just one more thing, Mr. Chair, I have a little experience. I worked for PB&R Railroad for a short period of time, the OB&O. and I was with car repair.
Oh, okay.
And so I know how important safety is and how important is we need to make sure we have our PMs and our brakes and everything's and our rails and everything is in line. You know, you have good brakemen, you have good people doing the work, and we don't want to lose our experienced people because we know that's been a big problem keeping our good workers. So, I mean, I know our chairman, he emphasizes in trades and trying to get our good people to keep them and what we can do more to get more. Are we making sure we're ahead of that? We're making sure we're keeping our good people, making sure we're getting the opportunity to get more people if we do have that problem in personnel.
Yeah, right now we've come a long way probably in the last 2 years on hiring. Obviously, the pandemic decimated Metro like every other organization, and it's been very hard to hire. We're pretty good shape right now on staffing. Now it's hard to maintain that, right? So we have a hiring freeze on right now because obviously we have a budget crisis, and we don't have the certainty. So we're hoping now that these sessions are moving through. We got a letter from DC last week. Ideally, we can move past this hiring freeze really soon here, because the longer that goes, that does hurt our rank and file positions. We also are working as collaborative as we can with ATU and our labor partners. These are great careers to have, but we're going to continue to really modernize our workforce as well. We're thinking through a training center to give them more advanced training as well. Things of if you went to the military now and some other industries, they're really getting into, artificial intelligence using data. They're also thinking 3D goggles and doing a lot of your training virtually that way. So we really want to modernize that. The worker of the future is going to also be a tech person and a mechanical person kind of combination. So we're trying to think through that as a strategy going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. The last piece you hit on was one of my questions. So your relationship with the federal government and getting ridership back. So some of the agencies are, they're migrating back to work. The federal government's calling folks back to work. Are you going to be able to, with your reductions, be able to handle that? I know you talked about Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Some agencies are like all hands on deck in the federal government. How are you able to adjust? Or have you, with your relationship with the federal government, how is that going to affect you through this fiscal year and projecting going forward?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. So obviously the larger federal conversation is complex, much bigger than WMATA. Obviously, a good example in Maryland, MARC trains would be significantly impacted by federal commuting patterns, probably equally or even more so. VRE in Maryland, in Virginia as well. And then the local bus systems, obviously it's a big impact, let alone the buildings, commercial space, the rents, the economic activity. I happened to be at COG yesterday, Council of Governments yesterday. One of the assistant directors for OMB was there. She was mentioning their goal is to have a 50-50 in office virtual. I've been very clear, it's not WMATA's job to tell the federal government or other places how their workforces should work. And WMATA, everyone is in. I mean, overwhelming our workforce is obviously 24/7 operational, but all administrative staff, minimum's 3 days, all management teams 4 to 5. Our buildings are full of people. We're collaborating, and I think that matters a lot to deliver a really, good organization culture. With that said, we are very happy every day we see a lot of federal employees back in the system. One, it's more people in the system. Two, they basically all pay because they use smart trip benefits the federal government pays for. They also generally pay a little bit higher fare because you have some longer haul trips that are not the $2, more the $4, $5, $6 trips, which is really valuable. More people in the system leads to a safer system as well. It's kind of like a park that way. So we're working really closely with OMB and OPM. I will say all 4 of our regional senators, U.S. senators, are doing some other work as well, trying to encourage the president and Congress to fund Metro for a little bit of the things we do that maybe are out of people's minds on a daily basis. So we have a very large police force that really specializes as well as part of the national security framework of the country. We do a lot with Secret Service, FBI, Pentagon, things of that nature. So there's some conversations about should we be kind of compensated for that because we're part of the national security framework. We're also talking to OMB and others regarding we used to collect, we're still short about $100 million of fare revenue that we used to get from federal employees in the system. What we've been basically saying is the system needs to be inspected and maintained for 365 days a year, regardless if a lot of people use it on Tuesday or Wednesday. We still need to have great track power structures and vehicles on Friday and Sunday too, right? So if the federal workforce is not going to be back to what it used to be, and I think it's pretty clear that it's never going to go back fully to what it was, how are we as a region and the federal government, I think everyone wants to see them part of that regional conversation to fund the infrastructure maintenance. So when they do need the system, that the system is in good working order for them.
All right, appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. So in light of what you said and the anticipation and the hope of getting back up as much as you can, because federal government does do some off-site work. With your hires, with the reduction in employment, do you guys keep an eye on, you kind of know where your folks went? So if you had to have a reduction from your yard workers or whomever, just in case you have to bring some folks back, because again, it takes time. You're highly skilled labor force, bringing them back in, getting them up to snuff and up to speed, from the certification standpoint, and getting folks in and get trained up. So.
Yeah, well, again, our retention's pretty solid right now. If the two positions we probably have the hardest retention problem with would be like custodian work and sometimes our frontline bus operator. I will say both of those positions, we have pretty large lists of people in the queue that are interested in coming to WMATA. So we do feel pretty confident that we can do pretty good turnover. Last year, we graduated the most bus operators certified in the history of the organization. And the year before was the second. So we really made up that kind of COVID deficit, if you will, really strongly. And we continue to really focus on kind of our training and certification process. Another big part of that is digitalizing our records and just kind of the overall IT systems in Metro that are pretty far behind. That we need to get a lot more digital that way, so we can really have like the state-of-the-art training and database management of all that, and that's kind of what we're working on. But right now, the workforce is I'm really proud of them. They're working really hard. And I think the results, generally speaking, again, every day is not going to be perfect, but most days we're running really good service for the community.
No, I appreciate that. Last thing, Mr. Chair, keep us in touch with you regarding the your workforce, if you have any challenges, as well as your IT systems. That was coming next, because I know you, like everyone else, has challenges with the IT systems. Everybody does, and you have 3 jurisdictions that you're dealing with. So if you could keep us up to date on that, we appreciate it, and we will continue to monitor, the work inside the Beltway and your joint work development inside the Beltway, particularly blue and orange, blue and green line corridors primarily. So,
sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, son.
Thank you. Couple of questions. One is big picture. When you testified last year, you talked about how the market for Metro, you saw it changing pretty dramatically into the future. From it was built to be commuter, suburb into city, federal government, all the stuff that we know. And last year you talked about it shifting to a system much less dependent on rush hour commuting and much more oriented towards sort of 24/7, 7 days a week. I mean, that sort of thing. You didn't mention that this year. Have you changed your mind, or are things still, is that still the future? And these are more modest recoveries of the traditional commuting patterns?
Yeah, well, great question, Senator. Good seeing you again. Maybe I didn't articulate it precisely. I believe generally in the philosophy, the way you portrayed it, which is Metro for a long time, and I think the operating kind of design of Metro was really kind of almost hub and spoke style,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And I think fundamentally, because I lived here before, used to use Metro. Weekends specifically didn't have really amazing frequencies, and midday and evenings were good, but not at a high level. Yeah. And I think what happened, and again, Secretary next to me started this process, and I think we then kind of moved it to the next piece, which is building an all-day frequent network is key. It's kind of what Europe and Asia have done forever. And therefore you are making a reliable system. So we have to be available for people that aren't just office workers, right? We have to, if we're going to care about an equitable region, people have to have access for transit, and it can't just be between 8 and 9 a.m. Right. So we, of course, want our rush hours to continue to grow back, because that is where we're going to get the biggest gains of pure ridership. It also helps the region the most on the mobility network to take, congestion management, things of that nature. And it's just every city, obviously rush hours exist, even the most dense transit networks all over the world. They still have, you go to Tokyo, 8 a.m. is going to be busier still than middle of the day. The difference is over there, middle of the day is still very busy because the entire culture is based on transit. So we are philosophically in the same alignment. We need to continue to invest in a transit network that is frequent all day and all days a week. We actually have a bus network redesign. That is something the region's been working on for years. We're kind of ready to go with that. We couldn't really pull the trigger on that because of this kind of fiscal uncertainty right now. But that will further make our network better on the bus side. There's parts where we run good bus service, but then at 8 o'clock at night, that bus service kind of goes away, or we run really good during the week and there's nothing on Sunday or nothing on Saturday and Sunday. So again, kind of connecting all this together. I also think we need to think about how we connect to the regional other operators a lot more. So as Mark and VRE move through trains through Union Station redevelopment, that's going to be a natural thing about how we think the red line should work. As the purple line comes on board, how does our bus network and other bus networks work with that? So it's a never ending evolution, I think, that we got to continue to address. Where are the customers? Where do they want to go? Where's new development? What are we trying to accomplish as a region?
I get that, but I'm talking about less about designing the future than predicting the future and then designing to meet the future that's predicted. I mean, your metro rail numbers are down 50% since before the pandemic, according to the chart here.
I have to look at the data he has.
I'm looking at it. I was looking at it 2 minutes ago.
What's the date on that? So it's basically, it's not monolithic, right? So on weekends, we are actually pretty close to full recovery of pre-pandemic.
That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Right. Because we're running good weekend service. And on the bus side, we're actually above pre-pandemic on the bus.
No, but I'm talking about
and then
rail.
during the week, well, that's rail too, sir.
No, I'm sorry, but
yeah,
I got this right here. Exhibit 2 in 2019, which is the full year before the pandemic, 175,000 something. And in 2023, 88,000 something. That's like a 50% drop.
So these, we'll have to look at what numbers you pulled. If you pulled paid ridership or overall ridership.
These are the annual ridership reported through the MFR.
Okay. Yep. So one thing in Metro is historically we never really reported ridership versus paid and unpaid. We now have the ability to do that because all of our gates have sensors that allow us to understand who's paying and who's not.
Right.
So now you're going to see ridership, and then there's a piece of that is paid ridership.
And what is this?
I think is just tap paid, I believe. But neither here nor there. You are correct that we are still
way down.
Now, if you went on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're more in the 60 to 65% recovery. Friday evening is starting to get better, but Monday and Fridays are still way down.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So where I'm going with this is, I mean, telework has reduced congestion on the roads in the commute process. It hadn't reduced congestion in my neighborhood because people are driving around the suburban neighborhood while they're at home, going out to get lunch. But in terms of commuting, it has reduced it. And so what I'm trying to get my head around, and I'm not suggesting you know the future, but you do this for a living, you pay more attention to this than I do. I mean, do you think that 10 years from now, let's say 5 years from now, you're going to be back up at what you were in 2019 in terms of transit, in terms of rail ridership, number one, and number two, if you are, how much of that do you need to make up off rush hour?
Well, one, I think you are correct that we can't predict the future. So
Right.
comment. My actually understanding is, depending on the day of the week, we're actually have a higher VMT, vehicle miles traveled, than pre-pandemic. So we actually have more congestion in certain parts of the network than pre-pandemic, and other parts we have less congestion. I don't drive, but my understanding is on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in Beltway in is a complete mess. As an example. So there's that piece. I will say that I personally believe overall transit ridership will be back to these levels. I'm not sure when that exactly is going to be. Federal employment is obviously one of those factors. Another part is special events. Part of it is how we manage our budget. If we do dips, like if we have to do the kind of draconian cuts that hopefully are off the table this year, but we have to do next year, then no, the answer will be it could take a generation to recover. So there's a lot of externalities mixed in there. If we have that predictability, and I think if we run the quality of service that we're running today with the service levels, I am convinced that overall we are going to grow back our ridership. And not only that, I think our long-term goal should be to grow ridership much further above than what it was. But to do that, we're going to have to get people at all times of day and all days a week to use.
Right,
the
I agree with
system.
that. No,
Yeah.
I think that's a very important idea. Okay, thank you on that question. Second question, maybe this is both for the secretary and for you, is on the long-term funding issue. I had a meeting last week with folks from the ATU, and they have a variety of ideas on this stuff, which I'm sure they've shared with you. And one of them is regional land value taxation. Is that something that you all have looked at yourselves as an option?
Want to go first?
Yeah, well, a few things. On the long-term financial, I think there's a combination which we haven't discussed, which I think that we do to make sure that the committee's aware of, is there's a capital element as well to this, because the dedicated funding in effect is spoken for into the future.
Yeah.
And that is another part of the equation that we'll have to deal with. So yeah, that is a possibility in effect, if we could do something around the stations, but the reality is we don't own much of the property. Well, you can speak to this, but
That's all right.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think what the secretary is saying is like Metro itself doesn't have as much land as people think.
Right, I
and
agree.
most of our land is actually parking lots and parking garages.
Right.
To the larger conversation, I think there's been some people suggesting, I'll do a statement that I think is what some people are referring to, and then I'll give a comment on just, I guess, at least my philosophy on that, which is, I think there's some people that believe that, what 70% of our actual population lives within a half a mile of a metro station.
Right.
And I've heard different people have philosophies that we should do like a tax overlay, say within a half a mile of a metro station, and that those, therefore it's like a higher real estate fee, if you will. I think lots of other people would suggest that is not a healthy approach, because then you're disincentivizing actual density and urban kind of TOD investment. So I think most of us believe we want to actually get more people living closer to transit, so then it's actually more affordable for them. They could go car free or car light. And then the more dense development is actually better for the environment and better for other services the jurisdictions provide, whether it's fire, schools, things of that nature. So I think there's a philosophical debate between some people on that topic. Our goal here is to get more people around transit. There's lots of other ideas that people are talking about. And I think it's really important that, we're not out there saying that this idea is the only idea. We're calling for people to say, let's finally all come together and solve this thing one way or the other, and stop talking about it for 40 more years. The first report on this topic came out in 1976, the year the rail system opened. And I kind of told people yesterday at COG, that was 1 year before I was born. And maybe we should all come together and solve it once and for all. And I think I feel like actually most people are really saying the same thing now, saying we need to address it. And I think we need to have a more open, transparent process around the region to bring consensus together.
I agree with it, but I think we're talking past each other.
Okay.
The ATU proposal or option that they laid on the table is not special taxation around metro stops. It's about land value taxation in the region. So it would not be targeted at metro stops.
Okay.
But it would be, other alternatives, people talk about dedicated sales taxes, people talk about dedicated property taxes, people talk about all kinds of things. The reason I'm asking you is that a land value tax seems to me to have a lot of advantages for Metro, because by taxing land as opposed to improvements, you are encouraging development around metro stops and other places and discouraging land speculation. So that's why I'm asking, have you guys, your staffs looked at that as one of the options? I'm just trying to learn about it.
So we have not, Senator, and again, we're not trying to come up with different revenue models at this point in time. Right now, quite frankly, we're spending all day, every day trying to close an FY25 budget.
No, I
This is the stuff. It seems like COG and others, I think want to have larger conversations, and I think these ideas will percolate around that. And I just want to, reiterate, I wasn't such an ATU. I haven't seen theirs, so
Okay.
I've just seen other people talk about the idea that I mentioned. So I thought it might.
No,
be
I know, I
the same
understand. There are
idea.
a lot, that is an idea. They're,
Yeah.
they're just different ideas. I'd encourage you to look at what the ATU has suggested, because I think it's pretty interesting. So
Sure.
again, I asked the secretary the same question. in
I'll
terms
bring
of-
it to, I think it should be something that we should bring forward to the training
Train-
commission. 'cause
exactly.
That's
Ex-
the avenue for us to.
Exactly.
deeper
I'd
into it.
encourage you to do it, because
Okay,
I think
will do.
I think it has a lot of advantages in terms of smart growth, in terms of metro and other things,
good.
as opposed to
Mhm.
sales taxes and property taxes and sort of other options. So I just want
Yeah.
to see if that was on your agenda. Okay.
Okay, thank
And
you.
last but not least, a small issue for the general manager. This is what you and I talked about on the phone the other day.
Okay.
You have shortage of police. Everybody has shortage of police. We're working in Prince George's County to put together a group apprenticeship sponsorship among police forces. And Employ Prince George has talked to WMATA about you all. And one of the issues that they raised with me was that alone among the police forces operating in Prince George's County, evidently their impression was that you require an AA degree for police folks. And did you have a chance to check into that?
Yes, sir. We do not. And Charlie Scott, who I think you know, Charlie
Yeah.
is with me. I believe he sent your office information
Oh,
a couple of weeks ago.
I apologize.
And I
Thank-
believe we have our first group of cadets starting in May or June.
So you do not require a degree?
We do not, no. So your staff should have
Great.
information.
Well, I
and if
apologize
there's-
for.
No,
That's great. No,
you're busy.
thank you for
And
getting
if there's
back to
more
me so
follow-up
quick.
you need, you just let us know.
No, that's, you guys are terrific, and Charlie's terrific. I appreciate that a great deal. Actually, I have one other question on the
Sure.
workforce side. On the bus driver issue, what are the requirements to become a bus driver?
So we actually used to have a high school. We actually relieved that for a period of time during the pandemic. So we haven't decided if we're bringing that back. We're doing some analysis to see if there's any kind of trending indicators on relation to that. And then we do pretty comprehensive training. Obviously, then there's background checks and things of that nature as well. So that's the
Oh,
current.
do you have an age requirement?
There is it's over 21 years old, I believe is there's a kind of interstate law problem for us. We have to go across state jurisdictions,
It's a CDL issue?
interstate. So kind of driving a commercial vehicle across state law lines is a challenge for us. And then there's like insurance related to that as well. So it's kind of a national topic, but it's especially challenging for us because again, we have three, we
I
operate as a tri-state entity.
I understand. Well, just FYI, I'm just spreading this good news, is that Maryland's anti-age discrimination law, unlike the federal law, applies to young people as well as older people. The federal law only applies to people over 40. The Maryland anti-discrimination law applies to people of all ages. And therefore, unless there's an exception, I think the federal law related to interstate transportation, I think is an exception.
Yeah.
It is against the law in Maryland to discriminate against people because they're under 21, because they're under 18. And employers generally don't know that. So I'm just trying to spread the good news. On your other issue about the high school diploma, I would strongly encourage you not to put a high school diploma requirement on it. I mean, I went to high school. I know lots of people with high school diplomas who would be terrible bus drivers. And so
I know people with multiple degrees, sir, that wouldn't be a good bus operator.
Exactly. So it's got to be about skills, not about degrees. So I really would encourage you not to go down that route. I mean,
Yeah.
employers all over the place are moving away from degree requirements that are not related to skills to do the job.
And we've done that, Senator. So, but we're also doing analysis to make sure that the outcomes are obviously what we're doing, we're looking
Terrific.
for. So far, so good on that. And
Terrific.
yeah, I'm happy to hear that. I guess I'm not happy to hear that you said old and then you said over 40. So I'm leaving the room now knowing I'm old. So,
That's the federal anti-discrimination law. So thank you. Senator Elfreth, do you have any questions? Okay, thank you all.
good seeing you all. Thank you.
Would you like to come back to the chair? Excellent.
Wait, hold on, Senator. You did not? We do have. No, I think we're good. Yes. Is there anybody here to testify on the WMATA budget? Okay. Sorry, we did not have you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. It's okay. Why we ask? Okay. Did you state your name and we go by committee rules, so that's 2 minutes per person. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Carrie Kosicki. I'm a resident of Silver Spring, and I'm the Montgomery County Advocacy Manager for the Coalition for Smarter Growth. We're the leading organization in the DC region advocating for walkable, bikeable, inclusive, and transit-oriented communities as the most sustainable and equitable way that we can grow and provide opportunities for all. So we're partnering with over 24 nonprofit business and labor organizations to support Metro and support transit funding in Maryland, and the funding necessary to close WMATA's budget gap. Transit is key for people to access jobs and opportunity and to climb the economic ladder. It helps us attract the next generation workforce, like myself. It saves households money and provides an alternative to sitting in traffic and polluting our air. The metro system is the backbone of our economy in the National Capital Region, and it's critical to the entire state of Maryland. The half mile around Metro rail stations represents just 3% of the National Capital Region's land, but it contains 30% of the region's property value, 40% of jobs, 50% of new apartments, and 65% of all new office development. The economic activity that this generates tied to Metro provides significant tax revenue to our state. With the capital funding that you approved in 2018, Metro made great progress in restoring the 40-plus-year-old system. Metro has restored high-frequency, reliable, and safe service, improved communications with the public, cut costs, and improved efficiency. Ridership is returning, and customer satisfaction is high. We thank Governor Moore for proposing $150 million in additional operating funding for WMATA in fiscal year 25 and again in fiscal year 26, and $250 million per year after that through FY29. But we also urge Maryland, DC, and Virginia to do even more to reduce and even close the operating gap this year and the next, so we can avoid fare hikes, service cuts, and delays in the capital program that would be devastating to our region. We also urge elected officials in DC, Maryland, and Virginia to come to a long-term dedicated funding agreement for WMATA by the end of this year. Transit funding should be the state's top transportation priority, as well as making streets safe for walking and biking. And this will support walkable, transit-accessible communities that are key to a sustainable, inclusive, and competitive future for our state. Thank you.
Thank you. And I found my list. Okay. So I have Josh Tolkien and Matthew Girardi. Yes, and if you have written testimony, I have a couple pieces of written. Yes, okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Josh Tolkien on behalf of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. I'm also a member of the Train Commission. We are here to testify to support the Metro budget and also urge, as the previous speaker did, the committees to strategize on how to allocate an estimated additional $60 million to achieve the necessary minimum funding for a long-term sustainable WMATA system. Ultimately, what we want is a sustainable transportation system that yields all of the benefits that a functioning system can bring. When people have long-term reliance, they make decisions on where they live. Builders make decisions on where they build. We have a transportation-oriented development infrastructure in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, where we are going to save people significant amounts of money and significantly reduce our climate impact if we signal that there is momentum and longevity around this system. We will have all sorts of other economic benefits from TOD and from reducing greenhouse gases by preserving the system that we have. We know the stats, we've talked about the ridership. Ultimately, I think part of what we need to do is put this budget in context of other potential expenses. If we're looking at how Maryland's going to reduce its greenhouse gases, we should be asking, what will the impact be of Metro funding functioning less than at its peak? And what will that cost for us to make up those greenhouse gas reductions elsewhere? It's our belief that system preservation of this excellent system is a sound financial investment and a good investment for the environment. Thank you.
Chair Elfreth, my name is Matthew Girardi. I'm the Political and Communications Director for ATU Local 689. ATU Local 689 is comprised of more than 15,000 members and retirees performing occupations within many skilled transportation crafts within WMATA, Metro Access, Dash, Fairfax Connector, DC Circulator, Streetcar, among others. Local 689 was established on January 19th, 1916, and since then, our union has helped turn low-wage, exploitative transit jobs into transit careers. We became an engine for the middle class of this region. To start, I would say that we applaud the governor's budget proposal for increasing Metro funding by $150 million. That proposed infusion served as a benchmark for the rest of the region, with Virginia now eyeing 130 million and DC proposing a 200 million contribution. However, we must note that all these proposals are not adding up to full funding levels needed to cover the gap. Instead, as you heard from the general manager and the secretary, the authority is currently proposing to balance the budget through three main measures. First, setting indefinite wage freezes for frontline transit workers. The second, raising fares by at least 12.5% and up to 25%. And the third, transferring over $165 million in preventive maintenance funds. To fully fund the system, Maryland would need to provide $209 million for the next fiscal year. If not, we believe these cost savings would be devastating and are a real gamble for the lives and livelihoods of all that depend on Metro. I'll state that fare increases hit working people the hardest and are regressive and could damage the impact of getting ridership back on the whole system. I would also say that wage freezes for our members would be unthinkable, frankly, because we already had to pay bonuses. The authority had to pay bonuses to already get those bus operators back to a place of where they're fully staffed. We're at a national CDL shortage, and frankly, having an upsurge in violence towards transit workers, not only in the region, but throughout the country. If you're having people who are having wage freezes and are having violence on them, that's a way to make sure that we're short-staffed for a long period of time. We call for full funding instead.
Thank you very much. And I'm not sure if the secretary knows this, but I'm the very proud daughter of a Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers Local 71 member. And so this is near and dear to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. No further public testimony. Mr. McCullough, you're back up with the secretary's budget.
Thank you. The Secretary's Office for the Maryland Department of Transportation decreases by $2.5 million, 2.5% in fiscal 2025. If you look at the capital budget on page 2 summary, you can see the capital budget for fiscal 2026 will total $36.7 million, or a decrease of 45.5%. The managing for results discussions begin on page 5 with the first exhibit 1 on page 5 showing the department-wide filled and vacant positions from January 1st, 2015 through January 1st, 2024. Good news. I know this committee really focused on vacant positions last year. In the intervening year, MDOT has an additional 382 filled positions as of January 1, 2024 than it did a year earlier. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the vacancy rate for calendar 2023. Each of the modal administrations had lower vacancy rates at the end of the year than they did at the beginning, with the exception of the Secretary's Office, but that's a special exception with the administration change that's expected to have more vacancies there as the Secretary fills out his team. Exhibit 3 on page 9 shows system preservation funding. For many years, the department had a goal of funding system preservation of at least $850 million per year. That's no longer a stated goal. Legislation passed last year did show or require the Spending Affordability Committee to weigh in on a minimum level of system preservation in the budget year. The SAC recommendation for fiscal 2025 is $1.1 billion, which equates to the 10-year average being spent on this. We do note that despite that level being in the budget, and they do exceed the $1.1 billion level, the gap between system state of good repair funding needs and the funding in the 2025 budget is growing. So over the 10 years, there's $11 billion gap between needs and funding. We've asked the Secretary to comment on system preservation funding. One of the other recommendations for the SAC committee was that the department, by the end of fiscal 2040, cut in half that funding gap in system preservation. On page 9 is the summary of agency spending. I always think it's interesting for the Secretary's office to note, as you can see in that pie chart, that half of the Secretary's office budget goes to technology, supporting all of the systems that support the other modal administrations. They also have grants that they provide to governmental and non-governmental transportation organizations of 17%. So of the roughly $110 million budget for the Secretary's office, only about 33% of that is, for the other departmental administration activities. Exhibit 5 on pages 10 and 11 show the proposed budget. As I indicated at the beginning, there was a reduction of $2.8 million in the current year compared to the working appropriation. That was, however, prior to the submission of supplemental budget number 1, which added $3.4 million to the Secretary's office budget. So with that adjustment made, the Secretary's budget actually grows by just over $570,000, or a 0.5% increase. You see the kind of the areas on the exhibit. Personnel grows by $243,000. This is a fairly small amount given the amount of increases that have been passed in the last few years in order to help reduce vacancy rates. The primary reason for that small amount is that the Secretary's office, as part of its 8% cost containment that the department announced in December, includes $2.1 million in increased turnover on vacant positions. This does limit the number of vacant positions the Secretary's office will be able to fill. Departmental administration, mostly related to technology, increases by 4.6%. At the top of page 11, you see the ongoing reductions that are built into the Secretary's budget. You can see the last 2 items that are italicized have part of the restorations that have now been made through supplemental budget number 1. Operating grants and aid decreased by $1.1 million. There's a chart on the next page we'll go for. Most of that is related to grants to metropolitan planning organizations. And I'll just note that in that case, most of those funds are federal funds. And over the last few years, there's been a sizable cancellation of unspent funds of about that magnitude. So this really does kind of right size the budget for that. And then finally, there are cost allocations shown at the bottom of the exhibit, which the department has no control over. They just budget what DBM tells them for those items. On page 12, exhibit 6 shows those operating grants in funding. The top part are the metropolitan planning organizations required by federal law. And then there are a few other grants that are shown. We'll note that part of the cost containment does zero out the Department of Planning grant of $400,000 that had been funded for many, many years. Personnel shown at the top of page 13, there were 8 fewer positions in the allowance than in the current year working. These all represent transfer to other units, not abolitions, outright abolitions. The PAYGO discussion begins on the bottom of page 13 with the first exhibit on page 14, exhibit 7, showing the 6-year funding by category. The 6-year program totals $171.5 million, which is $17 million reduction from the previous 6-year program. The fiscal 2025 allowance is shown on page 15, exhibit 8, and totals, as I indicated, $36.7 million. Cash flow analysis begins on page 16, and exhibits 10 and 11 on pages 17 and 18 show the increase between the 24 budget is introduced and the 24 working appropriation of $14 million and the decrease of $31.2 million between the working appropriation and the allowance. Exhibit 12 on page 19 is the second year we're showing first year funding. This information was required by legislation passed in 2022 to identify projects receiving first year funding for construction or design funding. For the Secretary's office in fiscal 2025, 4.5 or 12% of the total capital funding is first year funding. The rest of it is ongoing projects. Exhibit 13 shows those projects that are receiving first year funding, and then Exhibit 14 on page 21 shows the changes to the capital program, major changes from last year's CTP. Turning to the issues, the one issue discussed is the flexing of federal funds from highways to transit. Last year, the budget committees adopted narrative requesting the department to submit a report on this flexing of federal funding, and specifically on 3 highway formula programs. Those are shown in Exhibit 15. On page 22, the top portion shows the amount received by these programs, and the second bottom portion of that exhibit shows the percent transferred between highways and transit. We've asked the secretary to discuss how the department decides on the amount that should be flexed or transferred between highways and transit. The recommended actions begin on page 2024. There are 2, one for the operating, one for the capital. Both are annual language. The first restricting the operating grants in aid to the amount budgeted. The capital side requiring a report anytime capital programs change by $500,000 or more. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, Mr. Secretary.
Good afternoon again. For the record, Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of Transportation. I'll quickly go to the questions that were asked of me, just for your sake of time. The first issue we were asked to comment on is the sustainability of the department's recruitment efforts given the current fiscal constraints. As was noted, the department has had a focus on filling vacancies of last year and made significant progress in reducing those vacant positions. But as part of the budget reductions taken across the department, several modes, particularly MVA, the Motor Vehicle Administration, the Maryland Port Administration, and the Secretary's office has identified what we are referring to as soft hiring freezes as a method that we'll use to basically reduce and hit our budget targets. Again, we're calling these soft because it is focused on delaying the recruitments and hiring of people and not giving up on those positions, because I think we definitely need those positions. Again, we're a 24/7, 365 operations, so any position that deals with safety and maintenance, we're not going to touch. In terms of system preservation, we asked to respond to that in terms of its funding levels. Ensuring that we continue to invest the money necessary in our existing system, maintain it in a state of good repair is critical. And delaying system preservation work can result in emergency repairs and more significant rehabilitation work that is more costly, more impactful to our customers and in the future. With funding challenges ahead, with a significant unfunded system preservation needs, we need to ensure that we continue to make necessary investments in our existing systems, and we'll continue to do that as a top priority as well. In terms of impacts of the budget reductions, the third issue, whether the question, and this is the overall impacts of the budget reductions. So whether the question about vacancies, system preservations, operating budget reductions, the core answer will always be the same, that we'll continue to have safety as our primary focus. And we'll continue to seek to minimize the impact of these reductions on our customers. The budget reductions we made are required to live within our means and are not without impacts. Fortunately, there are tremendous opportunities available now, vast amounts of federal funding available now, and the goals of many of these grant opportunities are well aligned with Maryland's goals to build a more equitable and sustainable transportation system that spurs economic growth and connects Marylanders to life's opportunities. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with the legislature, our federal and local partners, and others in how we meet these investment levels that are needed into the future. Turning to the fourth issue regarding flexing federal funds, it's important to remember that federal funding is a tool to fund our priorities. It's certainly an important tool, but setting our priorities is always the first step. First, we decide on the projects that need funding. This is based on identified needs and project readiness. Once the funding needs are known, we look at all of our funding options for each project to determine how to fund these projects. When it comes to federal funds, each federal dollar comes with several rules attached to it about how the dollars can be spent, when it is available, how it has to be reported on, and how much state match it requires. We then make our best efforts to match the projects that are moving forward with the best funding options for each project. What's most important here is that projects are getting funded, not whether the project is funded with state dollars or federal dollars, but to deliver the priorities that we've all agreed to. Finally, the DLS includes 2 recommendations regarding the adoption of the annual budget bill language, and the department concurs with both of those. So we'd be glad to take any questions. Would do debt.
All right, let's do debt and then aviation. Still Steve.
Chairman, on Maryland Department of Transportation debt service requirements, as you all probably know, the department issues consolidated transportation bonds, or CTBs, which are 15-year tax supported debt. They also have non-traditional debt, which is anything that's not a CTB or a Garvey bond, or a grant and anticipation revenue bond. For this analysis, the fiscal 2025 allowance increases by $5.7 million. That's just basically representing the debt on current outstanding debt plus what the department expects to issue in fiscal year 2025. Exhibit on page 2, discussion of debt service coverage ratio. The bottom line there is the ratios are above the minimum required in all years. Do note that in the final year of the forecast, fiscal 2029, it does fall below for net income the 2.5 times coverage ratio that the department has adopted as a management practice, but it's still above the bond covenant level of 2.0. So, but that's just, again, a sign of the kind of fiscal stress the trust fund is under. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows the bonds issued, the debt service resulting, and the debt outstanding, which is the line. I will note in 2023 and 2024, there were no debt issued or expected to be issued those 2 years. That helps show that decrease in debt outstanding and the debt service. And then with the current forecast going out from 25 on, they do expect to start issuing more debt, which will start increasing those metrics. Exhibit 2 on pages 4 through 6 shows all of the non-traditional debt outstanding and the 2 projected non-traditional debt issuances that they have planned for the BWI baggage handling and the MTA fare system replacement. Recommended actions begin on page 7. The first one is slightly modified from past years. We used to have the recommendation for CTB and non-traditional debt separated. We've combined those into one recommendation this year because the non-traditional debt has always had the ability for the department to increase the amount that they wanted to issue as long as they came back to the budget committee's 45 days and giving you an explanation of why they want to increase the projected debt. This then would apply that same system to the CTB debt, given the fact that there are discussions about increasing revenues for the department. If something were to pass this session to increase revenues for the department, that could increase their debt capacity. And if at that point they might come in and ask for an increase so that the capital program could be accelerated. The second recommendation on page 8 is the annual recommendation for reports on the non-traditional debt. And that concludes my presentation.
Question from the rest of the committee? No questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Just very briefly, DLS recommends 2 pieces of language. We concur with both.
On the last item, I apologize, I was out of the room, back to the Secretary's office, if I might. And it's really just a quick question related to the Laurel Park MARC station. And basically what it says is nothing much happening. And problems with developers, CSX, kind of, normal life in the suburban city. My interest with, obviously, I represent the Prince George's side of Laurel, where the actual station is. And we've been wanting to do redevelopment on land there. if somebody who is the expert on this could get back with me
Will do.
to kind of fill me, and I haven't been up to date on that whole project since before COVID. I'd like to get up to
Okay.
date on what's going on with the Laurel, both Howard County and Anne Arundel. It's every place, and Prince George's County.
Will do. We'll
Great,
follow
thank
up
you.
directly with you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I came back in from another hearing. So if you could do the same for me with the Bowie State piece
Will do.
as well, and just let the, as part of the Prince George delegation, Laurel and Bowie
Yes.
matters trust. I know it reads that there's some sort of results are expected in the spring, but I'm not sure about that. So
Okay, we'll get back to you with both.
thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Quick question, Mr. Secretary, just on the debt ratio. Do you foresee us staying stable for down to from 2.9 to 2.2? Still above
Yeah,
the
but that
2?
in 29, right, is when we start to deal with that issue. I think
Okay.
as we deal with the larger funding issue, we'll address that.
Okay, just, we want to keep an eye on it,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, next we have Maryland Aviation Administration and Carrie Cook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Carrie Cook to present the analysis for the Maryland Aviation Administration. Beginning on page 1, the proposed fiscal 2025 budget increases 8.8 million or 3.9% to 236.3 million. I will note that this was published prior to the supplemental budget. So if you include that supplemental funding, that takes the increase up to about 11.6 million or about 4.9%. So MAA, like all the MDOT modes, did have reductions from projected fiscal 2025 levels on the operating side. So they had over 20 million in reductions from anticipated fiscal 2025 levels. But these increases in other areas have offset those. So I'm going to talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. On the PAYGO side, on page 2, the budget increases 70.2 million or 48% to 216.4 million. So getting here into the managing for results, which is really sort of the performance of the airport here on page 5, exhibit 1 shows total passengers at BWI. So calendar 2023, BWI had 26.2 million total passengers, which is just almost to their pre-pandemic 2019 level of 27 million. And they estimate that they're actually going to exceed the pre-pandemic level. They're forecasting it to be about 29.5 million in calendar 2024. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the passenger market share. So this is the amount of customers at the 3 regional airports, BWI, Dulles, and Reagan. So you can see in calendar 2023, BWI's passenger share, that's the blue bar there, increased slightly from about 31.9% in 2022 to 33.7% in 2023. This is something that we look at sort of just for general competitiveness in the region, but I will just give the caveat here that due to a variety of factors, the airport tend to attract different types of customers, right? So BWI tends to attract a lot of leisure travelers, Dulles has a lot of international folks, and Reagan attracts a lot of those business travelers coming into federal government facilities. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the cost per enplaned passenger. So this is how much it costs the airport for each person who gets on the plane that is later reimbursed by the airlines. So everybody has a stake in keeping this as low as possible, right? So in fiscal 2023, that amount for BWI has decreased. In 2022, it was about almost $12, $11.95, and in 2023, it's down to $10.79. So moving in the right direction there. Moving on to the proposed budget, Exhibit 4 on page 8 is the breakdown of their fiscal 2025 allowance. As usual, the vast majority of their budget is for operations at BWI. There's a smaller portion there for the Martin State Airport, and then for regional aviation grants as well. Exhibit 5 on page 9 is the proposed budget change. So as I mentioned earlier, it increases by about 8.8 million without including that supplemental funding. So most of the change here is personnel increases related to the statewide salary adjustments. They also have some operational increases for things like security, janitorial services. And then there's also an adjustment down there at the bottom of the table, and that is a debt service adjustment for paying off debt for a parking garage facility. Moving on to page 10 and 11 discusses the operational reductions to the budget. So as I mentioned earlier, they did reduce the budget relative to what it would have been in fiscal 2025, even though there's still a net increase. So Exhibit 6 is showing you all of those reductions, and you can see the breakout here of the reduction from the projected fiscal 2025 level. And then that middle column there is showing you how much was restored in that supplemental budget. So the supplemental budget was 150 million in general funds, as Steve mentioned, and then it was distributed to the various modes of MDOT. So they had about 2.8 million that was restored in that supplemental budget for a net 17.6 million in reductions from that projected fiscal 2025 level. The main items here, IT services, various types of licenses and softwares, some contractual janitorial services at BWI, as well as changing the type of contract they have for operations at Martin State. And you can see some of those items were partially restored with the supplemental budget. Moving on to sort of the revenue side of the airport performance on page 12, Exhibit 7. So this is showing the special fund revenues and expenditures for MAA. I will give the caveat that, you know, all the revenues are going into the TTF, just like all the modes of MDOT, and all the expenditures are coming out of the TTF. But this is just to really give you an idea of how well the airport is doing, right? So when we look at this chart here, the biggest change that I want to highlight for you is concessions at BWI. So they project that to increase by 19% from 24 to 2025. This does include some anticipated increase in parking rates. So MDOT did fold those increased revenues into their projections. So MAA does plan to increase some of the rates at those parking facilities. Probably after session, we will hear more details about that. And then at the very bottom of the chart here, that net income and loss, again, if their revenues were to pay for their expenditures directly in 2024, we can see that they would be almost 2 million in net income, and then 2025 about 500,000. And mostly that is due to the increase in the capital program. You can see just that line above, that increase in the capital expenditures. So in terms of a revenue standpoint, they're continuing to move in the right direction. But just based on how much they have in planned spending on the capital side is going to impact that net income. Moving on to Exhibit 8 on page 14. This is showing you some of the federal grants from the IIJA program that are supporting capital projects throughout the program. You can see here that they have quite a few that are pending and even more that have already been awarded for federal fiscal year 22, 23, and 24. Moving on to the personnel side, which begins on page 14. MAA's vacancy rate is below their budgeted turnover. So they're at about 6.2%, which is great. And in terms of the new positions that are reflected in the fiscal 2025 allowance, that is a technical error that occurred with the data given to DBM. So essentially these positions were new back in 2023. They were mistakenly taken out. But in terms of the folks working there, they have been working at aviation. They are supporting firefighting operations at the airport. So that's just a technical error there. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the capital side. Beginning on page 16, Exhibit 9 is the 6-year PAYGO allowance. So this is the entire 6-year program. It's about 1.1 billion. That should say billion instead of million. I apologize. And that is a decrease of about 44.6 million from the previous 6-year program. So the reason for that decrease is that they finished first-year construction on 2 major projects. And so that's just sort of decreasing the planned expenditures for the entire period. Exhibit 10 on page 17 shows that same chart, but instead it is broken out by funds. So you can see transportation trust funds, which is special funds in blue there. From fiscal 2024 to 25, the biggest change here that we see is actually in federal funds. And you can see that increases, it doubles actually from fiscal 2024 to 25. And that is due just to the timeline of where capital projects are. So once they reach construction phase or once they start the design phase, they become eligible for these funds that have been awarded. Exhibit 11 on page 18 is just showing you a list of all those capital projects. I will not go through that. And exhibit 12 on page 19 is showing you the cash flow changes. So this is just giving you an idea of where we are now in fiscal 2024 working versus what was appropriated last year during the session. There was about a 9% decrease, and that's just due to normal changes in terms of project schedules, permitting, bidding, and things like that. Beginning on page 20 and 21, these are the required items that were added to the CTP in terms of first year spending. So a bill passed in 2022 required the CTP to delineate projects that are getting funding for the first time, either in design or in construction. So that just gives you the breakout there. Exhibit 15 on page 22 shows you major changes from the previous year's CTP. So all three of these are projects that were added to the construction program once they have finished the development and planning phases. Moving on to the issues section, which begins on page 23. The biggest item here is the request for proposal for the concessions contract at BWI Marshall Airport. So we talked about this last year about after the announcement of the selected bidder, the current vendor sued. So MAA decided to cancel the solicitation, and essentially they started the process completely over. So there was a new RFP that went out, and it came out from MDOT, from the Secretary's office, rather than from MAA. So that was issued in September. They made a few changes from the previous RFP. So one of the sort of sticking points from the previous solicitation was that airport concessions experience piece. So the new RFP specified that that has to be fulfilled by the corporate entity itself, not by individual executives. They made some adjustments to the airport concessions disadvantaged business goal. As I mentioned before, the solicitation was from MDOT TSO, not from MAA. And finally, they added something called a labor peace provision, which was not present in the previous RFP. So basically, this is requiring that the selected vendor create these labor peace provisions with labor organizations that represent a minimum of 25 employees at the airport. So what this means is that they are allowing them to collectively bargain, but they're prohibiting them from striking or doing something else that would sort of interfere with the day-to-day operations, right? So this is a new thing that was not at all in the previous RFP, and something, you know, that I know the administration was interested in pursuing. So the final bids were due in early December, so those are currently over review. MDOT expects to notify applicants of their recommendation probably this spring, and that recommendation will be subject to BPW approval, as the previous one was. Page 25 has the recommended actions, and that is just to concur with the governor's allowance for both the operating and capital side. And that concludes my formal presentation. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Could you, and I'm certainly going to bring it up with the secretary and the administrator, but you said something about the collective bargaining agreement that would restrict or that would disallow the members of the union from striking. Are we talking a binding arbitration, or is that something that's being done within the CBA?
I would defer to them on that, just
Okay.
in terms of the legal
That's fine.
side.
Thank you.
Again, Paul Whitfeld, Secretary of Transportation, and thank you, Carrie, for the excellent work there. With me is Ricky Smith, Executive Director of the Maryland Aviation Administration. The MAA obviously is committed and working every day to make our facilities the most efficient, user-friendly they can be, the Easy Come, Easy Go Airport in the region. And Ricky will provide some more specifics on some of the capital projects at BWI and Martin State Airports to basically build the facilities for the future. But I also did want to mention that MDOT, and it was referenced, that we continue to support 34 public use airports throughout the state. And sometimes we lose sight of that, but that's important part of the local economy in those portions of the state. And we make sure that they're safe facilities and provide them grants to continue to succeed. And then finally, safety and security is, as you can imagine, in an airport environment, extremely important. And our people do a fantastic job in maintaining that. So with that, I'll have Ricky go through his presentation, and I'll obviously answer the question from the senator.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Rutherford and Chair, members of the committee. Thank you again for the opportunity to present MAA's 2025 budget request. For the record, my name is Ricky Smith, and I'm Executive Director and CEO of the Maryland Aviation Administration. I too want to thank Carrie Cook for her excellent work, working with the MAA on her excellent analysis. The aviation can be foreign and rather complex to people who don't live in this world, but she's done an amazing job getting her arms around the issues and analyzing them. So thank you very much for that. So at the MAA, we work to create and to support a strong, safe, and sustainable aviation system across the state of Maryland. BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport, Martin State Airport, and the public use airports across Maryland drive tourism, support economic development, create jobs, and connect our residents and businesses to the global economy. At BWI Marshall, airline and passenger traffic continue to grow with new international and domestic air service. We forecast that passenger traffic should fully recover to pre-pandemic levels by the end of this fiscal year. The MAA has a very strong, very ambitious capital program that is intended to support our airline partners as they continue to grow, while also enhancing the travel experience for our customers. Our 6-year projected capital program is the largest in MAA's history at over $1.1 billion. We have programmed $291 million in federal funding as part of this current capital program, the largest ever federal commitment for MAA's capital program. The MAA has leveraged increased federal funding levels from the bipartisan infrastructure law, aggressively pursued discretionary grant funding opportunities, and collaborated with federal partners to secure funds to move our capital funding needs forward. This capital budget includes the largest project in the history of BWI Marshall Airport, the Concourse AB Connector and Baggage Handling System project. This major project will provide new services and amenities for our passengers while ensuring Southwest Airlines has the facilities to continue its growth in our market. In December, the final major structural beam was added, marking a major milestone for this project. Our capital program also includes other major projects like our restroom improvement program that was recently recognized with a major award, the title of America's Best Restrooms. And progress continues on the construction of a major maintenance facility for Southwest Airlines. Southwest is now building the hangar portion of the project, which will accommodate 3 Boeing 737 aircraft with exterior apron space for another 8 additional jets. Last month, a major structural beam was lifted into place, a significant achievement in the project schedule. Moving on to Martin State Airport, which continues to support critical general aviation services, including aviation, law enforcement, and military operations. Last month, the Board of Public Works advanced a major contract to rehabilitate the runway at Martin State Airport. This $32 million contract will be underway later this year. This work will help ensure a safe, efficient airport and will shape Martin State Airport's for years to come. Again, I appreciate the continued support from the committee. MAA's dedicated, talented team remains committed to the successful, safe operation of Maryland's airports for all aviation system users. You should have a copy of our PowerPoint deck that we provided that provides updates on MAA's air service, financial, and capital program priority projects. The DLS analysts did not request MAA to respond to any items, and the recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance, which we appreciate and agree with. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you for the time again.
Yeah, so to the previous question, so unlike the transit discussion we had a little bit earlier, we will not be entering into a direct CBA collective bargaining agreement with any vendor there at the airport in terms of the food and beverage retail. That will be by the concessionaire to do that. But it does set the framework that basically in those negotiations, you cannot strike, similar to what flight attendants have, for instance. They can't strike either, just given the nature of the business, and neither can transit, as you know, as well. So it is a parameter within the contract that will be established and allows them to unionize.
No, I do, Madam Chair, if I might, I do appreciate that. I just wanted to know who was doing the negotiation. So that makes things perfectly clear. But if I may continue, Mr. Smith, how are you? Good to see you. Look, I'm not saying the others on the committee don't as well. I'm a very frequent user of BWI, and I do appreciate the growth that's going on over there and the accessibility, particularly the parking amenities over at the airport. That's huge for us. I'm looking at Exhibit 6. It talks about the operational reductions. And there are a number of zeros on the restoration side for some of your facility, for some of the things that are listed here. You know, Martin State Airport fixed base operational contract, where the restorations are at 0. So you're operating, so there's a reduction. So how impactful are those zeros? I think it's 2.8 million that was restored.
Yes.
And yet you're still 17 million down.
Yes.
So tell me how that impacts you and what are the projections going forward?
First of all, Senator, thank you for the question and thank you for continuing to use BWI Marshall Airport. We appreciate your commitment. You know, reductions are always difficult to manage around. If you've been in this business long enough, you kind of learn to manage without having all the resources you may want to have, and that's the case here. We've made some responsible reductions. This program still allows us to ensure that we will have safe and secure operations at the airport. It will not have a significant impact on our ability to ensure customers' experience continue to be at a high level. And so, yes, these are responsible reductions, and we'll find a way to work through them.
As we always mention to everyone that comes before, we're your partners. So just please let us know if they begin to negatively impact your services. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to see the labor peace agreement in the RFP. So that I'm looking forward to that. Of the direct employees, let me put it different. I always get confused about who works at the airport, who's employed by the airlines versus who's employed by the airport.
Yes.
To what extent are, I'll say, operational employees, mechanical employees, not retail, are airport employees as opposed to airline employees?
Thanks for the question, Senator. So if you can envision the airport being a mall.
Yeah, I do.
Right. We operate the mall.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And pretty much all the services that are provided at the airport are provided to businesses that lease space from us.
Yep.
Our role as the landlord is to maintain the facility, right? And so about 60% of our team are maintenance employees. They do all of the grounds maintenance, snow removal, landscaping,
Gotcha.
Painting, electrical work, and operations team. They do inspections of the airfield and the terminal to make sure that we're meeting certain safety and security conditions. The FAA has a significant presence there through operating the tower. We do have a tower of our own, which is pretty much a ground tower, but all the airspace management is handled through the FAA and their tower. The security checkpoints are handled by the Transportation Security Administration,
Gotcha.
Another federal government installation.
Yep.
And then all of the parking, the concessions activities, parking, rental car, food and retail, those are all handled by private concerns that have an agreement with us. And those employees are employees of those private concerns. We have about as stated in the report, we have about 500 employees that are state employees. And again,
they're primarily maintenance. Building.
About 60% of those are maintenance and operations. The others are operations. Gotcha. I'm sorry, administrative.
Gotcha. And so coming back to the the mechanical and the airline and so
Yeah.
forth.
Mhm.
Those are by individual airline, obviously, they're their employees.
So they are either employees of the airline, which in the case of Southwest, since it is a hub, those are the employees of the airlines. Other airlines have arrangements with ground service support providers, which is
Contractors,
a
yeah.
separate contract that provides those services for them.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, thank you for being here. Good to see you.
Always good to see you.
Quick question about the RFP. First of all, want to commend your team. I think it makes a lot of sense. It looks really healthy, has a lot of good checks and balances for everybody involved. What's the rough timeline for you moving forward on that RFP?
Probably spring, April, May timeframe
April, May? Okay,
for selection.
wonderful.
Mhm.
Seeing no further questions.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, oh, I'm sorry, we have one witness, if you would stay, both of you, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Goodman. Yes. Welcome.
Welcome. Hey, welcome, good afternoon, Chair. Yes, hello, my name is Brian Goodman. I'm currently a executive board member for ASME Local 174, and I work as a heavy equipment maintenance technician for the Maryland Aviation Administration. I've been there for about 6 years. I saved it, sorry, I stuttered a little bit. I save state money every day as a maintenance worker. I repair everything from functional equipment to dump trucks and to pickups. This means when this equipment breaks or needs maintaining, instead of having to purchase costly outstanding contract to fix this, we can do this in-house. The same can be said of the skilled trades position in my local. They include plumbers, electricians, carpenters, welders, locksmiths, and painters, to name a few. We do need more maintenance and skilled trades workers for the skilled trades, especially. It has been recently challenging to recruit and keep people in these positions. It's harder and harder to complete the higher. It's harder and harder to complete with the higher private sector salaries. I always hear guys saying I can get paid more, to get paid much more working here and there. Finally, my local is asking for help to make sure the MAA and MDOT are providing training opportunities for us existing employees and new hires. Offering career training is an important recruitment and retaining tool. We should be upscaling right now to learn how to maintain a new technology that our job will encounter in the future. We'll maintain a solar future, like maintaining a solar arrays and the electric vehicles. But we are now sadly, our fear is that we are going to contract the new workout, and the new technology will eventually put us out of a job. Also becoming more expensive to taxpayers when we could just train folks and keep doing the work in-house. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodman, and thank you for your service to our state.
All right, thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
Okay. Next, we have the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, Community Supervision, Mr. Cash.
This is community supervision. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Jacob Cash, and I'm a policy analyst for the Department of Legislative Services. Today, I'll be giving the budget analysis for the community supervision function of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. This unit includes the Maryland Parole Commission, which makes decisions on parole for locally and state sentenced individuals, and the Division of Parole and Probation, which provides criminal supervision and operates the Drinking Driver Monitor Program. Beginning on the cover page, this agency receives a fiscal 2025 budget allowance of $133.7 million, which is an increase of 3% or about $4 million. Most funding comes from general funds, while a portion of this agency's budget is also derived from Drinking Driver Monitor Program fees. In the middle of page 2, I'd like to point out progress made with special funds that were set aside from the dedicated purpose account in fiscal 2023 for legislative initiatives. That was the most recently completed fiscal year, and the funding, about $323,000, was encumbered through an existing relationship with researchers at the George Mason University. The team is currently reviewing DPP risks and need assessment tools that I'll be talking about a little bit further in my presentation. But the department also encumbered these funds to, for 3 purposes. These are all related to those involved in shootings, non-fatal shootings and homicides. They're meant to support literature reviews, as well as an implementation of a deep dive study for 10 individuals, as well as the creation and examination of an intervention strategy that would be specialized for such individuals. Moving on, joining me on page 3, the allowance is broken out into its constituent parts that make up that $133.7 million. The majority of funds go for personnel costs for the approximately 1,152 regular employees, 933 or 81% of which are parole and probation agents or drinking driver monitors. There's fewer administrative costs in this budget due to the style of remote operations that community supervision agents specialize in, but there's a larger proportion of services for those under supervision in this budget compared to others, including $1 million for sex offender rehabilitation services, $1.4 million for substance use disorder treatment, as well as agreements with local agencies for drug court, employment aid, and housing aid. On page 4, Exhibit 2 shows the budget change of $3.9 million. Most of the increase is from salary increases and fringe benefits related to the 2024 cost of living adjustments. Turnover was also rebudgeted at 11.8%, although vacancies have improved to 8.5%. So this puts the budget a little bit out of balance. The personnel funding did increase somewhat, but that reduction in turnover could put them in a point where they might need future deficiency funds. One reduction that I'd point out on this page is the removal of funding for the threshold transitional housing contract in Baltimore City. That was the subject of a budget issue in the DPSCS overview analysis. That program has not been operating since the pandemic, and since that funding has not been used in recent years, this is in alignment towards actual spending rather than a policy decision to remove that contract. Onto personnel. There is a gain of 7 positions on net, and that includes the removal of 3 administrative support positions, as well as the addition of 8 new social workers and 2 new supervisory social workers. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the number of filled positions over the past 2 years and the vacancy rate for community supervision agents. There has been a sustained improvement over the past year that brought vacancies to the goal that they stated in the DPSCS numerical hiring goals report from last year. The first key observation for this analysis is that probation cases have risen by 4,665 in total in fiscal 2023, or about 7%. The cases remain the pre-pandemic levels, as you can see in Exhibit 4 on page 7. The second key observation, which is seen in Exhibit 5 on page 8, is that caseload ratios have increased slightly or worsened over this past year. That is consistent with the increase in cases, but the increase is not as high as it could have been, considering that improvement in employment and vacancies that I just mentioned. That's also expected to have an improvement on next year's figures. By region, there was a stark difference in trends, with the West region seeing improvements that haven't been seen in that region since we started tracking this. And the capital region saw a dramatic increase to high rates that they haven't seen since before the pandemic. For that capital region, the ratio was about 86 cases per agent. And while the statewide ratio or the statewide average ratio should be closer to 82, using the active case data that DPSCS provided, approximately 67 cases per agent is the more appropriate ratio for the capital region. So there's quite a bit of improvement to be doing specifically there, and it's a challenging region for the department. Related to this whole caseload discussion, DLS is recommending to continue to adopt that committee narrative that requests the annual caseload data. Finally, the third key observation is an issue regarding the evidence-based risk and needs assessment tools. The division uses two tools: the initial screener, which categorizes individuals into one of two categories, which is either minimal risk or non-minimal risk. And the second tool that they use is the level of service inventory revised, or LSIR, which categorizes individuals further into low to high risk categories, as well as the separate categories that are there for the violence prevention initiative, as well as sex offender categories. Those case breakdowns are provided in Exhibit 6 on page 10. The agents that are seeing these cases receive a mixed assortment to balance out their workloads, so there's not dedicated caseloads depending on type. The classification tool, the LSIR, has been used as a classification tool for many years, and it's been revalidated every 3 years to be more consistent with Maryland data. But as of the last revalidation, the researchers found that there were some inconsistencies and some challenges in using it as a classification tool. They stopped using this as a classification tool in January of last year, but still use it to guide case planning. The initial risk screener, therefore, was then modified to allow the classifications to be determined from low to high, as I mentioned before. That risk screener is a temporary solution. It has been seen to be more stable and predictive than the LSIR. However, the department is still seeking to replace that tool with either an off-the-shelf solution or an in-house developed solution. The researchers found that some of those challenges in the old system or in the LSIR are that it is an older generational tool, tends to overemphasize substance use problems, and can lead to inconsistencies in supervision plans, specifically in how they're addressing the needs identified in the subsections of the classification tool. Some of those inconsistencies the researchers found were driven in part by the length of interviews, which typically fell short of that 45-minute target. And they recommended that there be increased employee training for that to increase compliance. So like, as I said, DPP is in the process of replacing the LSIR with a new tool. That process is starting now, and they're expecting to complete this process or make considerable progress by the end of the fiscal year. So DLS is recommending to adopt committee narrative, requesting a report on that transition by November 1st. The two recommended actions are found on page 12, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions? These issues, I think, came up last year. We've discussed them with the secretary or the interim. I think we still have some work to do, but look forward to working with you, Madam Secretary, and anybody from your team.
Good afternoon, Chair Alford, members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I'm the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today is Joseph Sadal, Deputy Secretary of Administration, and Martha Danner, Director of the Division of Parole and Probation. The department appreciates its ongoing collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services and Mr. Cash for your thoughtful analysis. Community supervision is a very important component of our public safety mission. It involves many stakeholders in collaboration with the courts and law enforcement. We are proud to work with over 450 agency and community partners to help people have successful lives. DLS noted that community supervision's vacancy rates have improved, and we are very proud of that. Allegheny, Hartford, Kent, Somerset, Talbot, and Worcester County DPP offices currently have no vacancies. This has been accomplished by working closely with our recruitment unit. As a result, in calendar year 2023, there were 2 drinking driver monitor academies that graduated 26 drinking driver monitors and 4 parole and probation agent academies that graduated 115 agents. Additionally, we interact with the community through our knock and talk initiatives, teams consisting of DPP agents, social workers, and the warrant apprehension unit work together to facilitate check-ins with our clients and their families. This allows us to further assess the needs of our clients and connect them to additional services. I have accompanied the DPP team on several of these outings and know firsthand the great impact that this is making for our clients and their families. DLS did not ask the department to comment on any specific issues, but they did make recommendations for reports for the department, and the department accepts the recommendations. We're happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, always great to see you. Do we have your notes? Your
My-
responses?
Yes, you
We
should
do.
have them.
Okay.
If you don't, we'll make sure that you get them, but you should have them.
I get those. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, thank you. We had talked last year about the vacancies and the workforce issues, and there was the discussion done after that about creating apprenticeship pathways in parole and probation. And I remember a meeting, I guess in May, where there was a discussion of a model to do that. What is the status of that?
So we're still, as you know, the governor has rolled out apprenticeship programs, and we're looking at apprenticeship programs throughout law enforcement and public safety. And we're still in the infancy of that, looking to see that how we can continue to develop that. It's probably going to be more at a DPP agent trainee type position, but we're still exploring that opportunity.
I'm just curious. I mean, I know the governor's proposal, and I'm working with the governor's office on that, but that's a funding issue. But I'm talking about the actual design. I mean, we talked about the issue that the traditional requirements were for BA and some social science and then in-house training. And with your staff, I saw a presentation with DBM of converting that over to not having the 4-year degree requirement and to creating an apprenticeship where people, I mean, that was like in May, sort of what's happened since May.
Joe, do we know whether HR removed that requirement? Hasn't been removed? Let us follow up on that, Senator Rosenpat, and see where we are with that, because we did have some transitions at HR that it may have slowed.
I see. Okay. I'd appreciate that. And part of it is obviously eliminating the degree requirement and putting in a skill requirement instead.
I'll check on that.
But also
today.
converting it less into a train in the classroom and more into have classroom training as a registered apprenticeship and lots of learning on the job, because, and you know more about this than I do, but just a little bit I've learned about it, is there aren't very many private sector equivalents of parole and probation officers. So it's a very specialized field that
Absolutely
requires learning from those who've actually done it. So
FTO training, field training.
Field training, exactly. So
Yes.
if you all could get back to on the details of that, because I mean, I was very impressed that the department moved as quickly as it did in looking at this. And so I'd love to see us continue to move quickly. So if you get something
Absolutely,
back to me,
sir.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll get
Thank you.
back to you.
Just a couple of questions about the classification tool. I know we had this discussion last year. I think it's really important as we think about the folks who were under supervision, who were either the victims or perpetrators of violence in our communities. Is just unacceptably high, has been for years, a challenge that you all inherited, and I appreciate that. At the same time, I'm going to ask the two questions together. What are you looking for in the next tool as you're evaluating? And I'd love to continue this conversation over the interim while you choose that next tool. And then what kind of quality control measures in real time do you have in place? For instance, if somebody is, classified as low risk and yet goes off and, unfortunately commits a great act of violence, is there any kind of, does your team come together and discuss what went wrong and what needs to change internally to prevent that moving forward? So not just relying on the tools themselves, but also the human capital and experience your staff has.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. Absolutely. We get emails when any of our clients under supervision are victims or suspects of a non-fatal shooting or homicide. We review all of the cases from agent to frontline supervisor and all the way up to the secretary. We staff cases that may have some problems with them at our field operations meetings. So that's our process.
Okay. And then what are you looking for in the next tool that you maybe did not have in the last tools?
Well, currently, we are looking for a tool that will better assess risk and needs at the same time.
Okay.
For the appropriate level of supervision.
And if I can add, Senator, that after action report that we get for our clients that are involved as either a victim or a suspect in those non-fatal or fatal shootings, I get that every week. So I'm able to actually review that and chime in and ask questions where needed to see how we need to take corrective action, or if corrective action is even needed.
I appreciate that. Last year, we also talked about the ratio of caseload, the caseload ratio. And last year we had discussed, and I know it's a shift, but the rationale behind maybe grouping instead of having, like, my mother was a probation officer, so this is familiar to me. Instead of having 79 cases under my caseload of a mix of low, moderate, high risk individuals, could it not be more specialized to have 10 high risk and 100 low risk, and kind of spread out the responsibility a little more instead of having each agent responsible for a myriad of caseload issues?
So let me say that I think that is possible with excessive training, because some specialized caseloads require a different expertise. But also understand that depending on the jurisdiction that you're in, that is the driver for that caseload. So you may have urban areas where the caseload is much different. You may have a higher sex offender volume in an urban area than you have in a suburb area. So we have to manage it as well based on the caseloads that are presented to us in those areas.
Thank you. Okay. Just something I always think about. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Would you mind staying? We have two witnesses. I would love for you to hear what they have to say as well. Ms. King and Ms. Barrett.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Senators. I think the other witness won't be speaking today, so it's just me. Good afternoon. My name is Keisha King. I'm an ASME member, Local 3661. I'm a senior agent for the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services in the Division of Parole and Probation. I'm here today to garner your support to ask for increased funding to aid parole and probation agents, office professionals, and intake reviewers across the state of Maryland. Currently, the Division of Parole and Probation is severely understaffed, which has led to overburdened agents who are unable to provide the necessary level of supervision and support to individuals under our care. This not only compromises public safety, but also places an undue burden on the dedicated agents who are tasked with an overwhelming number of cases. While I understand the agency graduated 115 new agents, it's not enough. In Exhibit 5 of the agency's operating budget summary for the Baltimore region in 2023, the agency reported an average caseload size of 56 senators. I myself have a workload of 155 cases, with approximately 105 to 110 of those in an active status. And then I have cases that are in a non-active status that still require work. Additionally, I dedicate a full day as a duty day agent with some of my colleagues manning offices as clerical staff and completing intakes for new clients in the absence of intake reviewers. The single most significant way to reduce caseload sizes to manageable levels is by increasing funding to hire and retain agents, allowing agents to provide more personalized attention and support to the clients we serve. Increasing funding is not only a matter of public safety, but also a matter of social and fiscal responsibility. So I implore each and every one of you to support this funding increase ask for the benefit of our communities, our state, to hire more agents, office professionals, and intake reviewers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
And thank
no
you
problem.
for your service to our state. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, Senator Rosebud, I'm sorry.
Oh, you have a question? Oh,
Couple
sorry.
of questions, because
Yeah.
you actually do this work. I'm interested in. So how often do you have direct contact with the folks you're working with?
So daily, on a regular basis, I could have clients call in to report. I do a central district report day. I do a duty day. So we can do call-in reports. We have clients texting us. We have clients emailing us. We do video reporting. So it's quite extensive.
And how you do that is under at your discretion. What's text versus video, what's versus in person, or how does that
So
work?
it's based on their supervision level. For the low moderates and the moderates, they report on a monthly basis. So 1 month it's call-in, and then the next month it's face-to-face. So in Central District is where I see my clients face-to-face. And then there are times when, if I need to see other clients, I have them come into the office during duty day. After I've done my shift, I'll have client report later on in the afternoon.
To what extent? So let me ask a question a different way.
Mhm,
So it varies by individual, how often you're in touch with them.
Their supervision level.
So that's,
Yes, sir.
that's like in a chart.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. And so how often what percent of the time are they not connecting you with when they're supposed to? Just on average, I'm saying, I'm sure it varies, but ballpark, you've been doing this work for a while.
I think, so for the low clients that are in a low supervision level, they only report on an incident-driven basis. So that means that they only need to contact us if they change their home address,
I see.
change their job, if they reoffend, incur any new charges, they're to be in contact
Gotcha.
with us. If they have special conditions also, of course, if they're working, then we need pay stubs. So they report in to provide that information as well.
And working is an example. So when they're working, is that a condition of probation?
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. So if they're working and it's not a condition of probation, they're not reporting, but if it is a condition of probation, they are reporting. Is that the way to think about it?
So on the court orders that our clients receive, it says that they are to work and or attend school regularly. And
So for everybody, it's either attend school
Yes,
or work. So that
Yes.
would be
Mhm.
pretty ubiquitous.
Yes.
What are the most common technical violations and what are the most common non-technical violations you run into?
The most common technical is failing to report as instructed. The most common non-technical is a reoffending.
Well, do people really report reoffending?
Some clients are honest enough that they
Really?
won't. Yes, because they're so worried about what's going to happen if they don't.
I see.
So they will call in and say, "Hey, Agent King, I got locked up." More times than not, we know because we get an email
Right.
that notifies us that your client was arrested or there's a warrant out for your client. So we know what kind of report we need to write into the courts or to the Maryland Parole Commission.
Gotcha. And so let's take the technical and then the non-technical. In the case of technical, so technical violation, what do you typically do?
So it's 14. So when we go to court for a violation of probation, it's 14 days. 15 days, 30 days, and then I think 45 days. So they could get, and really it's up to the court. We can make a recommendation to the judge, what we think that the client should have, but for the technicals, it's a set amount of time that they could get.
But in all cases, they go back to court.
For violations of probation, yes, sir.
The technical violations.
Yes.
Okay.
They do. They
they-
go back to court for both.
They go back, it's not a question of your recommendation, it's a question of, it's automatic.
It's automatic.
And then
yes.
your recommendation is how long they should, whether they should be back in jail or whether they shouldn't.
If we recommend jail time, yes,
But that's your I mean, that's your that's what you do. That's where your judgment comes into play. I understand.
yes.
And on the non-technical, so reoffense, is that basically then just out of your hands or still in your hands?
So we can still make recommendations to the judge. Ultimately, it's up to the judge whether or not they take or accept our recommendation. More times than not, they do, because we know our clients, we know our cases. But we still are able to put forward a recommendation. And often it is what we are required to do. We have to give them a recommendation.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I knew a little bit of it. So thank you, Ms. King. Just for folks who are qualified or as low risk, they don't have to meet with you once a month. They just report electronically.
So they can report if I need, so I can contact them and say, hey, I need a copy of your pay stubs for, the last 2 months. Typically, they don't need to report in unless they have a special condition. So let's say if they have a drug special condition, then yes, then we require them to report in so that we can stay on top of whether or not, or supervise whether or not they're actually completing the condition. They may have community service. So, just whatever the imposition from the court, we have to make sure that if it's a special condition that's imposed by the court, that they are satisfying that condition.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And thank you again. It's always good to hear the on the ground expertise.
Yep, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, last but not least, DPSCS, Police and Correctional Training Commissions. Again, Jacob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, my name is Jacob Cash. I'm a policy analyst for the Department of Legislative Services. And today I'll be providing the budget analysis for the Police and Correctional Training Commissions within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. This unit includes the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, as well as the Correctional Training Commission, which are two independent commissions that set entry-level standards for training of law enforcement officers and correctional officers in the state of Maryland. Beginning on the cover page, this agency receives a fiscal 2025 budget allowance of $12.1 million, which is an increase of about 2% or $216,000. Most of the funding comes from general funds, while a portion is also derived from state, local, and federal agency user fees, as well as the $2 million appropriation to the Police Training and Standards Fund. Joining me on page 3, Exhibit 1 breaks down the appropriation into its constituent parts. The majority is for personnel costs, but this agency does have a larger amount of administrative overhead than other units of the department due to the nature of developing standards and providing training. The Public Safety Education and Training Center is the permanent campus that PCTC uses, and those maintenance, utilities, contractual, and supplies costs to operate it make up approximately 23% of the agency's cost, while about 5% are for rental agreement or for a rental agreement in Baltimore City to provide in-service training near the pretrial complex. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows the proposed 2% budget increase broken down to the individual item changes. And again, for this agency, most of the increase comes from salary and fringe costs associated with that fiscal 2024 cost of living adjustment. There's a slight decrease in turnover funds, which is slightly counterintuitive, similar to the previous budget we just heard, since their hiring is improving. And on that issue, it appears that there could be a slight budget shortfall, so we're asking PCTC to comment on the adequacy of those personnel funds. Exhibit 3 on page 6 demonstrates the improvement that PCTC has made in employment. They only need to fill 3 positions as of January 2024. That is a over 300% reduction from the 13 vacancies that they had in January of 2022. The first key observation for this agency begins on page 7. The MPTSC fund was first established in fiscal 2019, and it's statutorily provided with $2 million in state legal fee revenues each year. NDLS has been tracking the plans and activities related to it since it was established. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows the current spending and funding data, which demonstrates how low the actual spending has been in relation to the growing fund balance. The budget committees have expressed concern in the past that there was not enough oversight for this fund, and the 2024 budget bill included language restricting $500,000 until a strategic plan was submitted for how to spend this money. The past activities and the future plans for it are laid out on page 8, but to hit the highlights, the past spending was mostly aimed at buying training SUVs, buying a task analysis study for developing training objectives for the various positions that they train, as well as initial major IT project oversight costs and a virtual reality training simulator called Apex. MPTSC plans to increase the investment in simulation-based learning, considering a capital program to create a physical learning environment for the simulation-based systems that they have currently procured and are planning to procure. The fund is set to be partially spent down, mostly through the learning management system replacement, which is a major IT project that has been in the works for several years. A contract was approved in October for $5.8 million, and that will be spent down over the next few years. It will not be spent down faster than they make money. So we still expect that the balance for this fund will continue to grow. Some of the other procurements that are being made are smaller and include classroom technology upgrades, curriculum development, as well as various training instructors and consultants to develop training plans. In the strategic plan, there were also 6 strategic goals with accompanying objectives as well as performance measures. And those are all laid out in Appendix 3 at the back of the analysis. The goals in general show attention to detail as well as faithfulness to the legislative initiatives that have been pursued in recent legislation. However, most of the listed performance measures, DLS found to only be simple checks that an objective has been acted upon rather than a direct measurement of how well that intervention went. So for instance, goal 3 states that MPTSC seeks to improve the reputation of the training center. However, they only propose to measure that by seeing if 3 specific tasks have been completed that ostensibly would have the effect of increasing reputability. It's just not directly measuring it through a survey or other collected data. Additionally, some of the goals seem to lack focus. For instance, goal 1 states that MPTSC intends to, quote, strengthen PSETC's position as the statewide leader in public safety training and education, end quote. But there could be varying implications on how this goal is interpreted, and it would be useful to have more focused goals. Overall, though, DLS was pleased with the strategic plan and thought that it laid out a satisfactory way of moving forward. The second key observation for PCTC starts on page 10, continuing on through page 12, and this is just the update on classroom utilization. Classroom utilization slightly increased, as you can see on Exhibit 5. Particularly, there's a 45% increase in local and federal agencies, so non-state agencies that are using the training space. Finally, Exhibit 6 on page 12 shows that skills area use slightly declined. And that's actually slightly a good thing because in the past, there has been overprescription of the skills areas, particularly the driver training course. The classroom utilization or classroom usage also increased in general because of that non-state agency use I just mentioned in the previous exhibit, while the simulation use was pretty similar in fiscal 2023. We're expecting as they increase the number of simulators that this utilization might decrease, but there would be an overall increase in the training provided by simulators. In conclusion, DLS recommends to concur with the governor's allowance, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Good afternoon again, Chair Alfred, members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I'm the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today is Joseph Fadal, Secretary of Administration, PCTC Executive Director Kate Gossett, and Deputy Director Matthew Milady behind us. Also behind me are Executive Directors Wayne Silva and Executive Director Jennifer Beskett. The department operates the Public Safety Education and Training Center, a large complex located in Sykesville, Maryland, comprising of classroom and administrative space, a physical training area, driver training facility, firearms training facility, and scenario-based training buildings. The department also houses the Police Training and Standards Commission and Correctional Training Commission. In my capacity as secretary, I'm the chair of the Correctional Training Commission, and the department supports each commission with finance, procurement, human resources, and other related administrative staff. The department, as well as both commissions, appreciate the ongoing collaboration of DLS, and we appreciate Mr. Cash's hard work and his thoughtful analysis. With regard to the analysis, DLS asked us to comment on the adequacy of the personnel budget for fiscal year 2024 and 2025, given actual vacancy trends for the agency. I'm pleased to report that PCTC has the lowest vacancy rate of all divisions and units and commissions within the department. I believe this is a testament to the commitment current and former public safety professionals have in providing training to new and existing officers from entry level through executive development. PCTC has benefited from salary enhancements and recent PIN conversions, and the department will continue to work with DBM regarding salary-related funding and any realignments that may be needed in the future. Additionally, the Police Training and Standards Commission submitted a joint chairman's report and strategic plan for the Police Training and Standards Commission Fund. It is my expectation that the enhancements available via this fund will open up the door for new opportunities for further enhancement and training at the Public Safety Education and Training Center for our partners. We're happy to report that we are currently on track to implement the new learning management system by fall of 2024. I would also like to clarify another issue that was raised in the analysis, stating the performance measures do not measure the quality of the intervention. In accordance with the state's Management for Results reporting process, the department collected data on the effectiveness of the training provided to prepare employees for both entry-level and supervisory roles until FY 2019. Overall, the priorities of the legislative body shifted to an interest of utilization of the PSETC. As the department altered the MFR measures reported, the department never lost focus of the importance of training evaluations. As such, training is constantly being evaluated internally and through partnerships with various training director organizations, as well as chiefs, sheriff's associations, and other correctional administrators. Despite being one of the smallest units within the department, PCTC annually supports the more than 25,000 mandated police and correctional employees in the state through certification and training. I would like to close again by stating that I am very proud of the work being done at PCTC and the dedicated employees there, and we're happy to take any questions. We all need.
It's home,
We
so
expect-
home for me, so, thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Secretary, Executive Director, guys. Just a couple of things. One, Madam Secretary, I'm again, love to see your, have your comments. But I'm also glad to hear that you addressed the performance measures and from a SMART goals perspective. I understand the dynamic staff you have there. I know the intent that those training leaders have. We talk about leadership development from entry level all the way through with a realistic career track and succession planning. So I know what you do there. And so when I saw the report, it was a little disturbing. So that's one of my first questions. So thank you for addressing that. I have always kept in close contact with the staff there because again, that was my home for a little bit. Secondly, and I will say this for the record, I can't tell you how proud I am to hear that there will be a learning management system. My goodness, it's been a long time. And from an IT standpoint, I can't get my head wrapped around this, but it's not just there, it's everywhere. There's such a disconnect on, everyone wants to have their own mode of IT systems, yet we have to understand that they have to connect. If they don't connect, it's a waste of money. So I'm so proud to hear that. And please keep me updated. We're looking forward to not having this conversation next year when you come before us. Thirdly, I'd like to stay in the loop on your job analysis studies that go. I mean, those are the things that make us go as the needs of our those we are in service to continue to advance, particularly from, a lot of what comes from the legislature. So I could use some help down here, folks. But so in order for us to make sure that if we can minimize the realm of unknown and certainty, we can better serve you here. So we want to stay connected with you in that regard. Lastly, Madam Chair, if I might, Senate Bill 256. I'm glad to see that the department itself is bringing that in, not just MP TSC and the chair of Judiciary is moving that bill on behalf of the department. I don't take offense, I don't think that it was a sponsor issue for the last 2.5, 3 years. I've gotten over that, trust me. But it's important, it's vital. Okay. It's vital that public safety and adherence to the legislative mandates that are put out, that the agencies and the training coordinates with that, because if it's not, it's costly. It costs everyone. And at the end of the day, we have a service supervised and for the men and women who have dedicated themselves to this, need to be able to focus on being safe and providing safety for our public. But we need to make sure that we codify everything that occurs here and in partnership. We need your partnership. I say that jokingly sometimes, but we do need help here, and that means partnerships as we move forward. And lastly, Madam Chair, Senate Bill 402. Madam Secretary, we spoke about this last week, I believe. I spoke to the sponsor of the bill, Senator McKay. If you look at lines, if there's anything else that we're missing here, but I'm believing that on page 2, lines 12 through 13 and lines 26 through 28 satisfy your needs. If you could take a look at that. If not, then let us know.
Will do.
It's about the conversation of the board. So if you take a look at that, if you still have some concerns, he's willing to put in whatever necessary amendments that may be necessary. But if you could take a look at that, we'd appreciate that. And and with that, I'll say I continue to be proud, and that always need to know that 2 million we gave you goes. And so just make sure of that, because as tight as funds are, we need to make sure that we preserve it, make sure that those who need the necessary trainings get that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. And again, we had this conversation last year about the funds that have kind of stockpiled over the years. And I'll just say with Governor Moore, it's a new day. And so I think there was some worry from this subcommittee that you were kind of sitting on that money in case you needed to invest it if you weren't going to get support from the governor's office for a priority. I don't think that's the case. And so we appreciate your strategic plan and telling us how you're going to spend that money. I am going to ask, I know you've kind of outlined you're going to spend it in fiscal 25. But any good plan is going to have due dates and line items in your budget and all those things. So would you mind putting pen to paper? I know you have goals for fiscal 26, fiscal 27. Jacob tells me that the 9 million in the out years that you want to spend here. I know the subcommittee would be really interested in your timeline, your plan, not just the goals, which are laudable goals, and we appreciate you thinking through them, but we also want to have an actual strategic plan with timelines and dates and budget items. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, and for the folks of it, the Training Commission, part of the establishment was to establish standards, but with those standards must come regulation. Right. And so our move here, we move slow here sometimes, but the move is to eventually have a regulatory commission in place, because that's the thing that makes the difference across the board. So the more you can move and arm us with information, the better we can say, okay, now let's get to the regulation component here. Versus having us do that. We don't need to do that here. All right. We should be your partners, not your, but we're not the regulatory folks, you all are. So but that's the goal. And that's why the establishment came about, and that's why the 2 million came about. And so if hand on your performance measures and things that you're looking to do to bring that about. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And as we get into what will most likely be some difficult budget years in the future, you having that plan for us helps us defend against any potential budget cuts moving forward. We know that you're on top of it, but we want to have the receipt so we can go to bat for you as necessary.
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay.
We will.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much, Madam Secretary and DPSCS team. Appreciate you being here. Hold on one second. Did we end it? Okay, sorry. I usually tell folks we are back here tomorrow. We have 5 budgets: Department of Juvenile Services, Office of the Public Defender, Workers' Comp, and Maryland Department of Environment. So that's 4 budgets. Should be a rather long afternoon. So bring your lunches. We start at 12:30. Thank you.